This week on the 11th OVC, the ugly truth about cav versus cav saber combat. So even though saber-to-saber combat and saber-to-bayonet combat were actually pretty rare in the Civil War, it did happen. How exactly were soldiers taught to fight in a saber charge, and what tactics were most effective in such an engagement? So the more I looked at the Saber Manual as it is taught in the manuals, and the more I thought about the dynamics of a saber charge, the more I realized what Whitaker was saying when he said that the Saber Manual as it is taught in the manual is woefully inadequate. For instance, when in a regimental charge against enemy cavalry who is prepared to receive your attack, you only have a passing moment to engage, deflect, parry, and take your opening to inflict your blow, all within a passing moment while you ride by each other at speed. So as a novice myself in this subject and acting as a new trooper would, I am thinking about maybe deflecting the enemy's saber, using my momentum to thrust, and then pulling it out on the way by. However, was that actually taught? And this subject has been an ongoing research project of mine for more than a year, with little to no primary resources discussing this in any major detail from any American author from the time. However, to properly give this topic its due justice, I reached out to Richard at the Phoenix Society of Historical Swordsmanship, who pointed me in the right direction and gave me a book written by a Master of Arms. This book was written just after their own War of 1870 and was translated into English by Philip Crawley in 2015, so pretty recently. So this was a treasure trove of information of the detailed tactics of saber-to-saber combat or saber-to-lance combat that I was looking for research. If you haven't read it yet, I strongly recommend it. In his opening chapter, he states the following: even with the perfection of firearms, there will always be in the coming wars, as of that of the 1870 wars, engagements between cavalry and cavalry, or even cavalry against infantry. For the study of saber on horseback to give results, it must naturally be that the men are fairly good riders who have their horses well in hand. Even then, it can be said that a good rider but a poor fencer has the advantage over a good fencer but a mediocre rider. And right there in that opening statement, we get the obvious but valuable nugget of information that a trooper who can control his horse in combat has the advantage against a superior swordsman. You can see this to be true when looking at the 2 or even 3-dimensional aspects of combat in general, where most martial arts focus on footwork and moving to the sides to gain a more advantageous angle, and with a trooper the same is true, except your horse does the footwork, not you. This is even confirmed in the next paragraph when the author states the following: in an individual isolated combat, an exceptional event to be admitted, he need only ably to direct his horse in rapid circles in such a way as to disorder his adversary. There is always an easy method for doing this. Even when facing him, he must approach rapidly, deliver a saber blow upon the horse's muzzle, which will rear and, if not unseated, more or less make it impossible for the rider to effectively use his weapon against you. But outside this type of exceptional combat, and as a general method for all types of horseback combat, a superiority of horsemanship assures a marked advantage than a superiority of fencing ability. So, in that previous quote, he confirms that if you find yourself in isolated or one-on-one combat, which by the way he even admits is a rare and exceptional event, that running rapid circles around your enemy gains you the advantage in dozens of momentary opportunities that you will gain from such movement. But the second and most surprising thing to me in that last passage of the author was the mention of cleaving the horse's muzzle to get him to rear or at least become uncontrollable. While an obvious statement when you think about it, I'd mentally put blinders on due to the value placed on horses that we generally have and the ability to capture and remount them, which is even reinforced in a popular YouTube video discussing this very issue of why you wouldn't want to kill horses in the battlefield. So reading this brought me back outside the box and made me realize that the target isn't just the other trooper, but again, obviously his mount as well. If you can unseat the rider or make the horse uncontrollable, which for many horses is easier than dealing with the rider, then you have won that one-to-one combat. As we will see as we continue to dive into this manual, the author, who has extensive experience in the French War of 1870, really tends to focus on deflecting the head-to-head melee, riding around the enemy's horse, and slashing and stabbing at the gut, flanks, legs, and muzzle of the horse, all while using the enemy trooper's offside to protect you from his powerful counterattack, again assuming he's right-handed. This leaves a grotesque image of a mutilated horse flesh that reminds us that such combat is brutal, but of course very effective, thus rendering the other trooper incapable of using his saber skills against you. So in closing up this video, the author then sets up the premise for the rest of his book by stating the following. But one must join a sufficient practical understanding of riding and a practical understanding of fencing, and one will become stronger than if you had not developed them, and it will come about in a relatively short time that you will have very appreciable results. In addition, a rider who knows his saber has a greater assurance, a greater confidence in himself, and a more military appearance. Thus, we will continue to dive into what cavalry saber charge may have looked like if trained swordsmen would have met other trained swordsmen, possibly East Cavalry Field, Brandy Station, and of course a few others. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and until next time, ride hard.